You're listening to Midwest Coven Cast presents Weekend Reads. I'm Marilyn of Midwest Coven Cast, and each week I will be reading to you, dear listeners, occult works that are in the public domain. All of this I do with the goal of helping each of us grow in our knowledge and practices. Here in Season 1, we will be making our way through Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy or magic, published in 1531. I hope you enjoy this week's installment. Chapter 55. How auspicias are verified by the light of natural instinct, and of some rules of finding of it out. Auspicia and auguria, which foretell things to come by animals and birds, Orpheus, the divine, himself, as we read, did teach and show first of all, which afterwards were had in great esteem with all nations. Now they are verified by the light of natural instinct, as if from this some lights of divination may descend upon 4-footed beasts, those winged and other creatures by which they are able to presage to us of the events of things, which Virgil seems to be sensible of when he sings. Nor think I heaven on them such knowledge states, nor that their prudence is above the fates. Now, this instinct of nature, as saith William of Paris, is more sublime than all human apprehension, and very near, and most like to prophecy. By this instinct there is a certain wonderful light of divination in some animals naturally, as is manifested in some dogs, who know thieves by this instinct, and men that are hid, unknown both to themselves and men, and find them out and apprehend them, falling upon them with a full mouth. By the like instinct, vultures foresee future slaughters and battles, and gather together into places where they shall be, as if they foresaw the flesh of dead carcasses. By the same instinct, partridges know their dam, whom they never saw, and leave the partridge, which stole away her dam's eggs, and sate upon them. By the same instinct, also, certain hurtful and terrible things are perceived, the soul being ignorant of them, whence terror and horror ceaseth, when men think nothing of these things. So a thief, lying hid in a house, although no one knows or thinks of his being there, strikes fear and terror and a troublesomeness of mind into the inhabitants of that house, although haply not of all, because the brightness of the instinct is not common to all men, yet possessed of some of them. So an evil person, being hid in some large building, is sometimes perceived to be there by some one that is altogether ignorant of their being there. It is mentioned in history that Heraskis, a certain Egyptian, a man of a divine nature, could discern evil persons, not only by his eyes, but also by their voice, he hearing them afar off, and thereupon did fall into a most grievous headache. William of Paris also makes mention of a certain woman in his time that, by the same instinct, perceived a man whom she loved coming 2 miles off. He relates also that in his time a certain stork was convicted of unchastity by the smell of the male, who, being judged guilty by a multitude of storks whom the male gathered together, discovered to them the fault of his mate was her feathers being pulled off, torn in pieces by them. The same doth Varro, Aristotle, and Pliny relate concerning horses, and Pliny makes mention of a certain serpent, called the asp, that did such a like thing. For she, coming to a certain man's table in Egypt, was there daily fed, and she, having brought forth some young, by one of which a son of her host was killed, after she knew of it, killed that young one, and would never return to that house any more. Now, by these examples, you see how the lights of presage may descend upon some animals as signs or marks of things, and are set in their gesture, motion, voice, flying, going, meat, color, and such like. For according to the doctrine of the Platonists, there is a certain power put into inferior things, by which, for the most part, they agree with the superiors, whence also the tacit consents of animals seem to agree with divine bodies, and their bodies and affections to be affected with their powers, by the name of which they are ascribed to the deities. We must consider, therefore, that animals are saturnine, what are jovial, and what martial, and so of the rest, and according to their properties to draw forth their presages. So those birds which resemble Saturn and Mars are all of them called terrible and deadly, as the screech owl and hollet, and others which we have mentioned before. Also the horn owl, because she is a saturnine, solitary bird, also nightly, and is reputed to be most unfortunately ominous, of which the poet saith, the ugly owl, which no bird well resents, foretells misfortunes and most sad events. But the swan is a delicious bird under Venus, and dedicated to Phoebus, and is said to be most happy in her presages, especially in the auspices of mariners, for she is never drowned in water, whence Ovid sings, most happy is the cheerful, singing swan in her presages. There are also some birds that presage with their mouth and singing, as the crow, pie, and daw, whence Virgil, this did foreshow, oft from the hollow home that ominous crow. Now, the birds that portend future things by their flying are these: buzzards, the bone breakers, vultures, eagles, cranes, swans, and the like, for they are to be considered in their flying, whether they fly slowly or swiftly, whether to the right hand or to the left, how many fly together. Upon this account, if cranes fly apace, they signify a tempest, and when slowly, fair weather. When two eagles fly together, they are said to portend evil, because two is a number of confusion. In like manner thou shalt inquire into the reason of the rest, as this is shown by number. Moreover, it belongs to an artist to observe a similitude in these conjectures, as in Virgil, Venus, dissembling, teacheth her son Aeneas in these verses. All this is not for naught, else me in vain my parents augury taught. Lo, twice 6 swans and a glad company, Jove's bird pursued through the ethereal sky, in heaven's broad tracks, now earth in a long train, they seem to take or taken to disdain, and they return with sounding wings they sport, and heaven surrounding in a long consort. Just so, I say, thy friends and fleet have gained the port, or with full sails the bay obtained. Most wonderful is that kind of ogring of theirs, who hear and understand the speeches of animals, in which, as amongst the ancients, Melampus, Tiresias, Thales, and Apollonius, and Hyanian, who, as we read, excelled, and whom they report had excellent skill in the language of birds, of whom Philostratus and Porphyrius speak, saying that of old, when Apollonius sat in company amongst his friends, seeing sparrows sitting upon a tree, and one sparrow coming from elsewhere unto them, making a great chattering and noise, and then flying away, all the rest following him, he said to his companions that that sparrow told the rest that an ass, being burdened with wheat, fell down in a hole near the city, and that the wheat was scattered upon the ground. Many, being much moved with these words, went to see, and so it was, as Apollonius said, at which they much wondered. Porphyrius, the Platonist, in his 3rd book of Sacrifices, saith that there is certainly a swallow of language, because every voice of every animal is significative of some passion of its soul, as joy, sadness, or anger, or the like, which voices, it is not so wonderful a thing, could be understood by men conversant about them. But Democritus himself declared this art, as saith Pliny, by naming the birds, of whose blood mixed together was produced a serpent, of which whosoever did eat should understand the voices of birds. And Hermes saith that if any one shall go forth to catch birds on a certain day of the calends of November, and shall boil the first bird that he catcheth with the heart of a fox, that all that shall eat of this bird shall understand the voices of birds and all other animals. Also, the Arabians say that they can understand the meaning of brutes, who shall eat the heart and liver of a dragon. Proclus, also the Platonist, believed and wrote that the heart of a mole conduceth to presages. There were also divinations and auspices, which were taken from the inwards of sacrifices, the inventor whereof was Tages, of whom Lucan sang. And if the inwards have no credit gained, and if this art by Tagus was but feigned, the Roman religion thought that the liver was the head of the inwards. Hence, the soothsayers inquiring after future things in the inwards did first look into the liver, in which were two heads, whereof one was called the head for the city, the other for the enemy. And the heads of this or another part being compared together, they then gave judgment and pronounced for victory, as we read in Lucan, that the inwards did signify the slaughter of Pompey's men and the victory of Caesar's, according to these verses. In the inwards all defects are ominous. One part and branch of the entrails doth increase. Another part is weak, and flagging lies, beats and moves with quick pulse the arteries. Then, the bowels being finished, they searched the heart. Now, if there were a sacrifice found without a heart, or a head was wanting in the liver, these were deadly presages, and were called peculariae. Also, if a sacrifice fled from the altar, or being smitten, made a lowing, or fell upon any part of his body than he ought to do, it was the like ominous. We read that when Julius Caesar on a day went forth to procession with his purple robe, and sitting in a golden chair and sacrificing, there was twice a heart wanting. When C. Marius Utica was sacrificing, there was wanting a liver. Also, when Caius the prince, and M. Marcellus C. Claudius, and L. Petilius Cos were offering sacrifices, that the liver was consumed suddenly away, and not long after, one of them died of a disease, another was slain by men of Liguria, the entrails foretelling so much, which was thought to be done by the power of the gods, or help of the devil. Hence it was accounted a thing of great concernment amongst the ancients, as oft as any thing unusual was found in the inwards, as when Sylla was sacrificing at Laurentum, the figure of a crown appeared in the head of the liver, which Pausanias the soothsayer interpreted to portend a victory with a kingdom, and therefore advised that Sylla should eat those entrails himself. The color, also, of the inwards is to be considered. Of these Lucan made mention. Struck at the color, prophets were with fear, for with foul spots pale entrails tingled were, both black and blue with specks of sprinkled blood they were. There was in times past such a venerable esteem of these arts, that most potent and wise men sought after them. Yea, the Senate and kings did nothing without the counsel of the augurs. But all these, in these days, are abolished, partly by the negligence of men, and partly by the authority of the fathers. Chapter 56. Of the soothsayings of flashes and lightnings, and how monstrous and prodigious things are to be interpreted. Now, the soothsayings of flashes and lightnings, and of wonders, and how monstrous and prodigious things are to be interpreted, prophets and priests of Hetruscus have taught the art. For they have ordained 16 regions of the heavens, and have ascribed gods to every one of them, besides 11 kinds of lightning, and 9 gods which should dart them forth, by showing rules for understanding the signification of them. But as often as monstrous, prodigious, and wondrous things happen, they do presage, as is most certain, some great matter. Now their interpreter must be some excellent conjector of similitudes, as also some curious searcher, and of them who at that time are employed about the affairs of princes and provinces. For the celestials take such care only for princes, peoples, and provinces, that before the rest they might be prefigured and admonished by stars, by constellations, and by prodigies. Now, if the same thing, or the like, hath been seen in former ages, we must consider that very thing, and what happened after that, and according to these to foretell the same, or the like, because the same signs are for the same things, and the like for like. So prodigies have come before the birth and death of many eminent men, and kings, as Cicero makes mention of Midas, a boy into whose mouth, whilst he was sleeping, the ant put corns of wheat, which was an omen of great riches. So bees sat upon the mouth of Plato when he was sleeping in the cradle, by which was foretold the sweetness of his speech. Hecuba, when she was bringing forth Paris, saw a burning torch, which should set on fire Troy and all Asia. There appeared unto the mother of Phalaris the image of Mercury, pouring forth blood upon the earth, with which the whole house was overflowed. The mother of Dionysus dreamed she brought forth a satyr, which prodigious dream the event that followed made good. The wife of Tarquinius Priscus, seeing a flame lick the head of Servius Tullius, foretold that he should have the kingdom. In like manner, after Troy was taken, Aeneas, disputing with Achilles, his father, concerning a fight, there appeared a flame licking the head of the crown of Ascanius, and doing him no hurt. Which thing, seeing it did portend the kingdom to Ascanius, persuaded him to depart for monstrous prodigies, did forerun great and eminent destruction. So we read in Pliny that M. Attilius and C. Portius, being consuls, it rained milk and blood, which did presage that a very great pestilence should the next year overspread Rome. In Lucania, it rained spongeous iron, and in the year before, Marcus Crassus was slain in Parthia, with which also all the soldiers of Lucania, being a very numerous army, were slain. L. Paulus and C. Marcellus, being consuls, it rained wool about the castle of Coruscanum, near which place, a year after, T. Aeneas was slain by Milas. And in the wars of Denmark, the noise of arms and the sound of a trumpet was heard in the air. And Livy, concerning the Macedonian wars, saith, in the year when Annibal died, it rained blood for 2 days. Concerning the second Punic War, he saith that water mixed with blood came down from heaven, like rain at the time when Annibal did spoil Italy. A little before the destruction of Leuctra, the Lacedaemonians heard a noise of arms in the temple of Hercules, and at the same time in the temple of Hercules the doors that were shut with bars opened themselves, and the arms that were hanged on the walls were found on the ground. The like events may be prognosticated of other like things, as oftentimes in the times past something hath been foretold of them. But concerning these, also, the judgments of the celestial influences must not be neglected, concerning which we shall more largely treat in the following chapters. Chapter 57. Of Geomancy, Hydromancy, Aeromancy, and Pyromancy, 4 divinations of elements. Moreover, the elements themselves teach us fatal events, whence those 4 famous kinds of divinations, geomancy, hydromancy, aeromancy, and pyromancy, have got their names, of which the sorceress in Lucan seems to boast herself, when she saith, the earth, the air, the chaos, and the sky, the seas, the fields, the rocks, and mountains high, foretell the truth. The first, therefore, is geomancy, which foreshows future things by the motions of the earth, as also the noise, the swelling, the trembling, the chops, the pits, and exhalation, and other impressions thereof, the art of which Almadel, the Arabian, sets forth. But there is another kind of geomancy which divines by points written upon the earth by a certain power in the fall of it, which is not of present speculation, but of that we shall speak hereafter. Now hydromancy doth perform its presages by the impressions of waters, their ebbing and flowing, their increases and depressions, their tempests, colors, and the like, to which also are added visions, which are made in the waters. A kind of divination found by the Persians, as Varro reports, was that of a boy who saw in the water the effigies of Mercury, which foretold in 150 verses all the events of the war of Mithridates. We read also that Numa Pompilius practiced hydromancy, for in the water he called up the gods and learned of them things to come, which art also Pythagoras a long time after Numa practiced. There was of old a kind of hydromancy had in great esteem amongst the Assyrians, and it was called Lucanomancy. for a skin full of water, upon which they put plates of gold and silver and precious stones written upon, with certain images, names, and characters. To this may be referred that art by which lead and wax, being melted and cast into the water, do express manifest marks of images of those things we desire to know. There were also in former years fountains that did foretell things to come, as the Father's fountain at Achaia, and that which was called the water of Juno in Epidaurus. But of these more in the following chapter, where we shall speak of oracles. Hither also may be referred the divination of fishes, of which kind there was use made by the Lycians in a certain place which was called Dina, near the sea, and a wood dedicated to Apollo was a hollow in the dry sand, into which he that went to consult of future things let down roasted meat, and presently that place was filled with water, and a great multitude of fish and strange shapes, unknown to men, did appear, by the forms which the prophet foretold that should come to pass. These things doth Athenaeus more at large relate in the history of the Lycians. After the same manner also doth aeromancy divine by airy impressions, by the blowing of the winds, by rainbows, by circles round about the moon and stars, by mists and clouds, and by imaginations and clouds and visions in the air. So also pyromancy divines by fiery impressions, and by stars with long tails, by fiery colors, by visions and imaginations in the fire. So the wife of Cicero foretold that he would be consul the next year, because when a certain man, after the sacrifice was ended, would look in the ashes, there suddenly broke forth a flame. Of this kind are those that Pliny speaks of, that terrene, pale, and buzzing fires presage tempests, circles about snuffs of candles betoken rain, and if the flame fly, turning and winding, it portends wind. Also torches, when they strike the fire before them, and are not kindled. Also, when a coal sticks to a pot taken off from the fire, and when the fire casts off the ashes and sparkles, or when ashes are hard grown together on the hearth, and when a coal is very bright. To these is also added capnomancy, so called from smoke, because it searcheth into the flames and smoke, and thin colours, sounds, and motions, when they are carried upright, or on the one side, or round, which we read of in these verses in Statius. Let piety be bound and on the altar laid. Let us implore the gods for divine aid. She makes acute, red, towering flames and bright, increased by the air, the middle being white. And when she makes the flames without all bound, for to wind in and out, and to run around like a serpent. Also in the Athenian caves and fields of the Nymphus in Apollonia, auguries were taken from fires and flames, joyful if they did receive what was cast into them, and sad if they did reject them. But of these things we shall speak of in the following chapters amongst the answers of the oracles. Chapter 58. Of the reviving of the dead, and of sleeping or hibernating, wanting victuals, many years together. The Arabian philosophers agree that some men may elevate themselves above the powers of their body, and above the sensitive powers, and those, being surmounted, they receive into themselves, by the perfection of the heavens and the celestial intelligences, a divine vigor. Seeing, therefore, that all the souls of men are perpetual, and also that all the spirits obey the perfect souls, magicians think that perfect men may, by the powers of their soul, repair their dying bodies, with other inferior souls newly separated, and inspire them again, as a weasel that is killed is made alive again by the breath and cry of his dam, and as lions make alive their dead whelps by breathing upon them. And because, as they say, all like things, being applied to their like, are made of the same natures, and also every patient, subject, and thing that receives into itself the act of any agent is endowed with the nature of that agent, and made connatural with it. Hence they think that this vivification or making alive certain herbs and magical confections, such as, they say, are made of the ashes of the phoenix and the cast skin of a snake, do much conduce, which indeed to many may seem fabulous, and to some impossible, unless it could be accounted approved by an historical faith. For we read of some that have been drowned in water, others cast into the fire, or put upon the fire, others slain in war, and others otherwise tried, and all these, after a few days, were alive again, as Pliny testifies of Aviola, a man pertaining to the consul of Lamia, Calinus, Tubero, Corfidius, Gabienus, and many others. We read that Aesop, the tale-maker, Tyndareus, Hercules, and Pallas, the son of Jupiter, and Thalia, being dead, were raised to life again. Also that many were, by physicians and magicians, raised from death again, as the historians relate of Aesculapius. And we have above mentioned out of Juba, and Xanthus, and Philostratus, concerning Tillo, and a certain Arabian, and Apollonius the Tynean. Also we read that Glaucus, a certain man that was dead, the herb dragonwort restored to life. Some say that he revived by the putting into his body a medicine made of honey, whence the proverb Glaucus was raised from death by taking honey into his body. Apuleius also, relating the manner of these kinds of restoring to life, saith of Zacla, the Egyptian prophet, that the prophet, being favorable, laid a certain herb upon the mouth of the body of a young man, being dead, and another upon his breast. Then, turning toward the east, or the rising of the propitious sun, he prayed silently, a great assembly of people striving to see it. When, in the first place, the breast of the dead man did heave, then a beating in his veins, when his body filled with breath, after which the body rose, and the young man spoke. If these accounts are true, the dying souls must, sometimes lying hid in their bodies, be oppressed with vehement ecstasies, and be freed from all bodily action, so that the life sense and motion forsake the body, and also that the man is not yet truly dead, but lies astonied, and dead, as it were, for a time. And this is often found, that in times of pestilence, many that are carried for dead to the graves, to be buried, revive again. The same also hath often befell women, by reason of fits of the mother. And Rabbi Moises, out of the book of Galen, which Patriarcha translated, makes mention of a man who was suffocated for 6 days, and did neither eat nor drink, and his arteries became hard. And it is said in the same book that a certain man, being filled with water, lost the pulse of his whole body, so that the heart was not perceived to move, and he lay like a dead man. It is also said that a man, by reason of a fall from a high place, or great noise, or long staying under the water, may fall into a swoon, which may continue 48 hours, and so may lay as if he were dead, his face being very green. And in the same place there is mention made of a man that buried a man who seemed to be dead 72 hours after his seeming decease, and so killed him because he buried him alive. And there are given signs whereby it may be known who are alive, although they seem to be dead, and indeed will die unless there be some means used to recover them, as phlebotomy or some other cure. And these are such as very seldom happen. This is the manner by which we understand magicians and physicians do raise dead men to life, as they that were tried by the stinging of serpents were, by the nation of the Marsi and the Sili, restored to life. We may conceive that such kind of ecstasies may continue a long time, although a man be not truly dead, as it is in dormice and crocodiles and many other serpents, which sleep all winter, and are in such a dead sleep that they can scarce be awakened with fire. And I have often seen a dormouse dissected and continue immovable, as if she were dead, until she was boiled, and then put into boiling water, the dissected members did show life. And although it be hard to be believed, we read in some approved historians that some men have slept for many years together, and in the time of sleep until they awaken, there was no alteration in them, so as to make them seem older. The same doth Pliny testify of a certain boy, whom he saith, being wearied with heat, and his journey slept 57 years in a cave. We read also that Epimenides Nocius slept 57 years in a cave. Hence the proverb arose to outsleep Epimenides. M. de Maecenas tells that in his time, a certain countryman in Germany, being wearied, slept for the space of a whole autumn and the winter following, under a heap of hay, until the summer, when the hay began to eaten up, when he was found awakened as a man half dead and out of his wits. Ecclesiastical histories confirm this opinion concerning the 7 sleepers, whom they say slept 196 years. There was in Norvegia a cave in a high seashore, where, as Paulus Diaconus and Methodius the martyr write, 7 men lay sleeping a long time without corruption, and the people that went in to disturb them were contracted, or drawn together, so that after a while, being forewarned by the punishment, they dared not disturb them. Xenocrates, a man of no mean repute amongst philosophers, was of the opinion that his long sleeping was appointed by God as a punishment for some certain sins. But Marcus de Maecenas proves it, by many reasons, to be possible and natural. Neither doth he think it irrational that some should, without meat and drink, avoid excitements, and without consuming or corruption, sleep many months. And this may befall a man by reason of some poisonous potion, or sleepy disease, or such like causes, for certain days, months, or years, according to the intention or mission of the power of the medicine, or of the passions of their mind. Physicians say that there are some antidotes, of which they that take too great a potion shall be able to endure hunger a long time, as Elias, in former time, being fed with a certain food by an angel, walked and fasted in the strength of that meat 40 days. And John Bocadius makes mention of a man in his time, in Venice, who would every year fast 4 days without any meat. Also, a greater wonder, that there was a woman in Lower Germany, at the same time, who took no food till the 13th year of her age, which, to us, may seem incredible, but that he confirmed it. He also tells of a miracle of our age, that his brother, Nicolaus Stone, an Helvetian by nation, who lived under 20 years in the wilderness without meat till he died. That also is wonderful, which Theophrastus mentions concerning a certain man called Philinus, who used no meat or drink besides milk. And there are also grave authors who describe a certain herb of Sparta, with which they say the Scythians can endure 12 days' hunger without meat or drink, if they do but taste it or hold it in their mouth. Chapter 59. Of Divination by Dreams. There is also a certain kind of divination by dreams, which is confirmed by the traditions of philosophers, the authorities of divines, the examples of histories, and by daily experience. By dreams, I do not mean vain and idle imaginations, for they are useless and have no divinations in them, but arise from the remains of watchings and disturbance of the body. For, as the mind is taken up about and wearied with cares, it suggests itself to him that is asleep. I call that a true dream, which is caused by the celestial influences and the fantastic spirit, mind, or body being all well disposed. The rule of interpreting these is found amongst astrologers, and that part which is wrote concerning questions. But yet, that is not sufficient, because these kinds of dreams come by use to diverse men after diverse manners, and according to the diverse qualities and dispositions of the fantastic spirit. Wherefore there cannot be given one common rule to all for the interpretation of dreams. But according to the doctrine of Synesius, seeing there are the same accidents to things, and like befalls like, so he which hath often fallen upon the same visible thing hath assigned to himself the same opinion, passion, fortune, action, and event. As Aristotle saith, the memory is confirmed by sense, and by keeping in memory the same thing, knowledge is obtained, as also by the knowledge of many experiences, by little and little. Arts and sciences are thus obtained. After the same account, you must conceive of dreams, whence Synesius commands that every one should observe his dreams and their events and such like rules, viz., to commit to memory all things that are seen and accidents that befall, as well in sleep as in watching, and with a diligent observation consider with himself the rules by which these are to be examined. For by this means shall a diviner be able by little and little to interpret his dreams, if so be nothing slip out of his memory. Now dreams are more efficacious when the moon overruns the sign which was in the 9th number. Note: 9th number, the 9th house of the horoscope, known as the house of science and religion. Of nativity or revolution of that year. Note: revolution, when the sun has attained as to the earth its original position, or the place it occupied at the moment of birth. Or in the 9th sign from the sign of perfection. Note: sign of perfection. This is the first house of the horoscope, that house of the heaven or zodiac rising at birth, the eastern horizon. For it is a most true and certain divination, neither doth it proceed from nature or human arts, but from purified minds by divine inspiration. We shall now discuss and examine prophesying and oracles. Chapter 60. Of madness and divinations, which are made when men are awake, and of the power of a melancholy humor, by which spirits are sometimes induced into men's bodies. It happens also sometimes that not only they that are asleep, but also they that are watchful, do with a kind of instigation of mind divine, which divination Aristotle calls ravishment, or a kind of madness, and teacheth that it proceeds from a melancholy humor, saying in his treatise of divination, melancholy men, by reason of their earnestness, do far better conjecture, and quickly conceive a habit, and most easily receive an impression of the celestials. And he, in his problems, saith that the Sibyls, and the Bacchides, and Niceratus, and Syracusan, and Ammon, were by their natural melancholy complexion prophets and poets. The cause, therefore, of this madness, if it be anything within the body, is a melancholy humor, not that which they call black choler, which is so obstinate and terrible a thing that the violence of it is said by physicians and natural philosophers, besides madness, which it doth induce, to draw or entice evil spirits to seize upon men's bodies. Therefore, we understand a melancholy humor here to be a natural and white choler. For this, when it is stirred up, burns and stirs up a madness, conducing to knowledge and divination, especially if it be helped by any celestial influx, especially of Saturn, who, seeing as he is cold and dry, is a melancholy humor, hath his influence upon it, increaseth and preserveth it. Besides, seeing he is the author of secret contemplation, and estranged from all public affairs, and the highest of all the planets, he doth, as he withcalls his mind from outward business, so also make it ascend higher, and bestows upon men the knowledge and presages of future things. And this is Aristotle's meaning in his book of Problems. By melancholy, saith he, some men are made, as it were, divine, foretelling things to come, and some men are made poets. He saith also that all men that are excellent in any science were for the most part melancholy. Democritus and Plato attest the same, saying that there were some melancholy men that had such excellent wits that they were thought and seemed to be more divine than human. So also there have been many melancholy men at first rude, ignorant, and untractable, as they say Tynachus, Hesiod, Ion, Calsinenses, Homer, and Lucretius were, who on a sudden were taken with a madness, and became poets, and prophesied wonderful and divine things, which they themselves scarce understood. Whence Plato in Ion saith that many prophets, after the violence of their madness was abated, do not well understand what they wrote, yet treated accurately of each art in their madness, as all artists by reading of them judge. So great also, they say, the power of melancholy is of, that, by its force, celestial spirits also are sometimes drawn into men's bodies, by whose presence and instinct antiquity testifies, men have been made drunk and spake most wonderful things. And this thing, they think, happens under a threefold difference, according to a threefold apprehension of the soul, viz., imaginative, rational, and mental. They say, therefore, that when the mind is forced with a melancholy humor, nothing moderating the power of the body, and passing beyond the bounds of the members, is wholly carried into imagination, it doth suddenly become a seat for inferior spirits, by which the mind oftentimes receives wonderful ways and forms of manual arts. So we see that any most ignorant man doth presently become an excellent painter, or contriver of building, and to become a master in any such art. But when these kinds of spirits portend to us future things, they show those things which belong to the disturbing of the elements and changes of times, as rain, tempests, inundations, earthquakes, slaughter, great mortality, famine, and the like. As we read in Aulus Gellius, and his priest Cornelius Partaris did at the time when Caesar and Pompey were to fight in Thessalia, being taken with a madness, foretell the time, order, and issue of the battle. But when the mind is turned wholly into reason, it becomes a receptacle for middle world spirits. Hence it obtains the knowledge and understanding of natural and human things. So we see that a man sometimes doth on a sudden become a philosopher, physician, or an orator, and foretells mutations of kingdoms, and restitutions of ages, and such things as belong to them, as did the Sibyl to the Romans. But when the mind is wholly elevated into the understanding, then it becomes a receptacle of sublime spirits, and learns of them the secrets of divine things, such as the law of God, and the orders of angels, and such things as belong to the knowledge of things eternal, and the ascent of souls. It foresees things which are appointed by predestination, such as future prodigies or miracles, the prophet to come, and the changing of the law. So the Sibyls prophesied of Christ a long time before his coming. So Virgil, understanding that Christ was at hand, and remembering what the Sibyl Cumea had said, sang thus to Pollio: "Last times are come, Cumea's prophecy. Now from high heaven springs a new progeny. And time's great order now again is born. The maid returns, Saturnian realms return." And a little after, intimating that original sin shall be of no effect, he saith, "If any prince of our old vice remained, by thee their void and fear shall leave the land. He a God's life shall take, with gods shall see, mixed heroes and himself their object be. Rule with paternal power the appeased earth he shall." Then he adds that thence the fall of the serpent, and the poison of the tree of death, or of knowledge of good and evil, shall be nulled, saying, "The serpent shall, and the deceitful herb of venom fall." Yet he intimates that some sparks of original sin shall remain, when he saith, "Some steps of ancient fraud shall yet be found." And at last, with a most great hyperbole, cries out to his child, as the offspring of God, adoring him in these words: "Dear race of gods, great stock of Jupiter, behold, the world shakes on its ponderous axe. See earth and heavens immense, and ocean tracts. How all things at the approaching age rejoice. Oh, that my life would last so long and voice, as would suffice thy actions to rehearse." There are also some prognostics which are in the middle betwixt natural and supernatural divination, as in those who are near to death, and being weakened with old age do sometimes foresee things to come, because, as saith Plato, by now much the more men are less hindered by their sense, so much the more accurately they understand, and because they are nearer to the place whither they must go, and their bonds being, as it were, a little loosed, seeing they are no more subject to the body, easily perceive the light of divine revelation. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Midwest Coven Cast Presents Weekend Reads. Join me next week for the next installment as we continue through Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy or magic. For more information about Midwest Coven Cast, you can visit our website at midwestcovencast.com. You can also follow us on social media at Midwest Coven Cast on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook, or at Midwest Coven on Twitter. We hope to see you there. Until next time, Coven, blessed be.